Amid escalating diplomatic row, India has spearheaded recommendations for Canada to fortify measures preventing attacks on worship places and effectively address hate speech. The proposals were presented during the UN Human Rights Council review meeting, where diplomats from India, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka shared their insights and recommendations. Indian diplomat Mohammad Hussain recommended Canada to strengthen the domestic framework to prevent misuse of freedom of expression for inciting violence and disallowed activities of groups that are prompting extremism. Let's in fact listen in to what he had to say.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. India welcomes and thanks the delegation of Canada for the presentation of their national report. We note the enactment of National Housing Strategy Act, Accessible Canada Act, and the National Strategy to Combat Human Trafficking. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, India recommends the following to Canada. 1. Further strengthen the domestic framework to prevent misuse of freedom of expression for inciting violence and disallow activities of groups which are promoting extremism. 2. Effectively prevent attacks on places of worship of religious and racial minorities, strengthen legislative and other measures to address hate crimes and hate speech. 3. Put an end to structural discrimination against children belonging to indigenous groups and address disparities in access to services by all children. We wish the delegation of Canada all success.
Meanwhile, joining us on the broadcast is my colleague Akshit Gupta. Akshit, over to you. What more can you share with our viewers?
Well, as Indian diplomat Mohammad Hussain noted that legislative enactments such as the National Housing Strategy Act and the Accessible Canada Act, while addressing the issue of attacks at the council meetings, and in a diplomatic move, India spearheaded recommendations for Canada to fortify measures preventing attacks on worship places and effectively address the hate speech issue. Well, the proposals were presented during the UN Human Rights Council review meeting, where diplomats from India, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka shared their insights and recommendations. India also recommended that Canada should strengthen its domestic framework to prevent the misuse of freedom of expression, particularly for inciting violence. And Bangladesh diplomat Abdullah Al-Furad commended Canada's progress in human rights protection and acknowledged the ongoing implementation of its strategy to combat human trafficking. Meanwhile, Sri Lankan diplomat Jaisakara also recommended Canada to the Convention on the Protection of Rights of All Migrant Workers, take measures against racial discrimination affecting immigrants' rights, counter misinformation against minority communities. And if I just also tell you, Canadian PM Justin Trudeau introduced a fresh SAR note in bilateral ties with India amid the continuing diplomatic standoff, affirming his earlier claim of Indian involvement in the killing of 6 separatist leaders, Harjeet Singh.
Right, absolutely, Akshit. Stay on with us. We're also being joined by Colonel J.S. Sodhi. He's an international affairs expert. Good morning, sir, and thank you so much for joining in on NewsX. Now, India has put forth its measures to prevent from potential attacks on places of worship. So, what do you make of this?
Jai Hind Asawari. It's my honor to be on a news channel. Till 1980, Canada was a peaceful country and many Indians immigrated there in hope of a better life. But everything changed in 1980 when Pierre Trudeau, the father of the present Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, became the Prime Minister, and he started giving asylum to the Khalistani and the jihadi elements, resulting in Canada becoming the new epicenter of terrorism after Pakistan and Afghanistan. India has done the right thing by voicing its concerns and requesting that Canadian government should give full security to the religious places and to ensure that their so-called freedom of speech does not impinge on India's security and sovereignty. Every person has a right of freedom of speech, but freedom of speech is never totally free. There has to be lines drawn to it. We have seen Canada has become an epicenter for anti-India activities and anti-Hindu activities, where every other week either a Hindu temple is desecrated or an Indian national is attacked on the Canadian soil. India has done the right thing, and now the Canadian government, in right earnest, should take all possible actions to ensure that their soil is not used in future for anti-India activities or anti-Hindu activities.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.